This is Megan Lucy, and I am here with ethnomusicologist Nathaniel Lucy, who's my husband, and has graciously agreed to talk to us about music information retrieval systems. So, to start off with, Nathaniel, can you briefly explain what an ethnomusicologist is and what you do in your research?
Yeah, an ethnomusicologist is similar to a musicologist who primarily researches classical music and performing arts, but a ethnomusicologist often does more popular music or music from outside the Western world, such as in any kind of international music in Asia, Africa, or wherever, any type of non-Western classical music.
And so you specifically study American folk music of the South and country music in popular culture.
Yes.
Okay. So as an ethnomusicologist, what types of information do you look for about music that's different than, say, what a musicologist studying classical Western music might look for?
For me, in general, it's not that much different because the music I study has a lot in common with Western classical notation. Same scale, same set of notes and tones that are used. And I would kind of just halfway in between musicologist and ethnomusicologist doing American popular music, but a lot of different music styles across the world don't translate well to Western notation. On your simple 12 tone, that you could play on a piano, you can't play a lot of music on a piano, and you can't organize in ways that they can express the different type of timbres, the different sound qualities that make certain instruments or certain sounds unique from others.
So one of the things that our text this week talked about was that some music from cultures outside of the Western world haven't been added to music databases, and it used Inuit throat singing as an example. But one thing that you're saying too is that our information retrieval systems aren't necessarily built to even be capable of searching for that type of music because a lot of them are built around the classical scale.
Yeah, and that's a different. It's a struggle for researchers who want to express what they've looked at and what they've researched to other people who might not be familiar with the music, and so you have to find this halfway in between if you want to describe the music or show it in some kind of graphical representation, especially in print, that you can't. It's hard to do that, and so there are different people have to develop systems or try to arrange different systems to try to best express the idea of the music itself to their audience.
Okay. Cool. So are there any information retrieval systems that you've used in your research that have been especially helpful, and what made them helpful?
The ones I've found helpful, I've had a lot of experience cataloging and archiving American folk songs recorded during the middle of the 20th century, and there are a good amount of useful resources, and you have there's one that I have used prominently in the Vaughan Williams Library. It's a British-based database that basically is an accumulation of all American and British folk catalogs from the late 19th century to today, because early on different researchers would go around and archive music that they found in books like this, where they would have simple notation with lyrics as well on it, and in a lot of these catalogs you could they'd have an index in the back where you could look at the tunes. Tunes often have names that are given to them that you can identify them by. If you look in hymn books, United States hymn books, they often have the tune name written at the bottom, and so you can see what tune it is. But then there are also subject matter and lyrics databases in these. But as technology has progressed, you can now clump those all together into online databases. But an issue with those is that we have all these different systems, individual database systems of archiving and indicating what type of song they are, or numbering them or cataloging them, is that they all get all these systems together. And so now there are some systems that are overreach, very broad, that go over the entire lots of different regional classifications. For the Vaughan Williams Library, they give an individual number to songs that have similar text together. So if you could search a certain song by either title, lyrics, or individual, so you have to know what individual song you're looking for to see connections with other songs. It'll give you a number, and that number will then connect you to other songs that are similar in nature.
Cool. And you've actually been involved in building a folk song database for the University of Arkansas. Can you talk about some of the challenges that you faced in classifying the music for that database?
It can be difficult. Yes, I worked for over a year at University of Arkansas Special Collections Library in cataloging a folk song archive there. My main task in the explicit categorizing and archiving in that part was looking at subjects and determining subject headings and which ones would be appropriate for the song according to the lyrics. And that can be very difficult because sometimes songs, you'll have songs that are incomplete, and so you don't exactly know what it is. And then you'll have another issue is if you include alternate titles, if you're familiar with a tune or a certain song, just being able to make those connections to the alternate titles can be difficult in deciding where it is, because people sing songs that can be similar, but then it can also have, you don't know if they're related or not, but you have to make that decision.
You used the phrase subject headings. I want to clarify for a second. Were you applying Library of Congress subject headings to the folk songs in that database, or was it a system of subject headings that the University of Arkansas Library created?
It was mainly one that we created ourselves. We looked a little bit at the Library of Congress subject headings and would take some inspiration from that, but we mainly use it to do our own. If a certain place was a certain local place or local idiom or idea was discussed, we would include that in the subject heading.
So the Library of Congress subject headings weren't they didn't have the granularity that you needed to address some of the very locally specific ideas expressed in the Arkansas collection.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving aside for a second, you're really good at explaining how Shazam works. You've done that for me before, and I wondered if you could share some of your knowledge about that with my classmates.
Yeah. So the basic idea is that you have some kind of recording device, whether it's a cell phone or something that can receive audio data, and it analyzes that, crunches that, and tries to match it with something else that's in whatever the database is, like Shazam. And the way that it does that is that it takes the audio and doesn't just and it recreates it basically within itself, whether it's in digital code, and there are ways that you can visually represent that too. But what it does is it collects what you hear, but it's often more detailed than what you would often think of what you hear. It's more than just what you can express on a Western notation, not just the pitch of it, but it's the timbre as well, because you're getting the full effect of the sound itself. So if all of the different tones and all of the different sounds and all the different qualities that make that sound unique. And so you can even differentiate between different covers of the same song, for example, because each one's going to sound unique. And there's different tones and different sounds that we can't hear, human ear can't hear, but the computer can, often above our hearing range, called overtones, to help create the different sounds and different timbre that we can hear inaudibly, that helps us recognize one sound from another, but we can't actually physically hear it.
And as of now, there's not really any way to notate those types of overtones and timbre qualities in, say, something like sheet music that we're used to seeing, or the Parsons code, which we mentioned earlier, that relies on classical notation and the ranges between notes in the classical scale.
Yeah, no system that's been widely adopted. People have worked for centuries there with alternate systems of transcription or notation. When I say notation, that's the prescriptive where you can recreate it. So something like the Parsons code is a notation system where it's made ahead of time and for the express purpose of replicating it for someone else. So if you read it, if you look at it, you can reproduce what the sound was. But for something like a spectrogram with Shazam, or some other systems where it's a descriptive type of system, where it's a transcription of something what's going on, and so it's not for the express purpose of being able to reproduce the sound, on a piano or whatever instrument or by the voice. It's a way to express how that sounded at that moment in time.
Yeah, and so one of the things that's cool about using spectrograms like Shazam does is that it doesn't limit the search capabilities to just what we think of as music, because Shazam can also now recognize other types of audio files like dialogue from movies. Or we saw that MIT was working on a project to recognize bird calls using spectrograms.
Yeah, you can use just the spoken voice, because everyone's spoken voice has their own unique timbre. So my sound of my voice sounds different than your voice sounds different than our neighbor's voice. And it can be hard a way to describe that, the way the voices sound differently, the timbre of it. But computers can do a good job. Spectrograms can do a better job of analyzing that. So that's why our smartphones have our own, audio technology devices. Computers have audio technology, recording technology that can even, recognize individual voices and the individual words and sounds that you're saying. So you can talk to Siri and she'll know what you're talking about. This is the type of technology that can happen.
So, can you explain why a more precise system like the spectrogram system that Shazam uses is important for ethnomusicology as a field of study?
It's important whenever we can see the visual representation of it, and it gives us a way, like I was saying, it's a descriptive type of representation, so we can see what happened in the moment. There's no way that we can replicate it because it's so complex. There's so much information and data. It can actually be kind of difficult to see at times what's going on. But if you can look for patterns. The important thing is looking for patterns in there. So I went to a conference of heavy metal music one point in time, and one of the presenters talked about analyzing the Cookie called Cookie Monster vocals of dark metal or black metal, the real low grumbling, type of guttural sounds of singing, and looking at that and analyzing what is actually going on in there. And what he did was he isolated into an audio booth and had the singer sing in it, which doesn't provide the most ideal situation because it's better in context with the other instruments, but you are able to look at, okay, this is what's actually going on in the music. This is how this timbre is created. This is the predominant tone, because it's often hard to hear exactly what note they're roughly singing, so you can see where they're focusing on in their voice, and you can analyze it in new and different ways with spectrograms.
Cool. So one last question I have for you is, if you could ask librarians or information retrieval system developers to design a better system for retrieving music information, what features as a music researcher would you want that to include?
I would. I mean, it's really hard because every researcher is going to go into things differently. There are music researchers who are more interested in looking at text, and they're more interested. Some that are more interested in looking at notation. The indication of the notation, so then they can reproduce it. Historical archives, whether it's classical. A lot of the earliest archives, a lot of the earliest types of archives and catalogs, and within music is for the idea of reproducing and looking at the way that composers compose their music, and looking at the ways that we can, in some ways, interpret how this is, because a lot of the early notation is very ambiguous in how to do it. But today, with more researchers looking at ways of not just producing it, but analyzing within its cultural context and societal context, I think it's important to have those audio cues, and audio databases can be important, especially now with more recording devices. Things are being now recorded more heavily. One thing I think is important, one thing I think is very useful as a fan of music, but then also as someone who's looking into sometimes analyzing it, is a database like whosampled.com, which is a fan-based one, where primarily fan-based one, where community of music lovers go on and listen to songs and recognize the samples or callbacks to other songs, and then links them to them, and describes where to find this one. So hip hop music often uses samples, and so you can see what this exact audio segment from this song is from originally.
Yeah, so that's a crowdsourced database that's looking at creating metadata around samples within hip hop music primarily.
Yeah, and so then you can see how many times a certain song from the 70s, like a James Brown song, has been sampled since then, or you can see how many times a certain artist has been sampled, or an artist has sampled other people.
Cool. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective as an ethnomusicologist. I appreciate it.
Thank you.